lowest level in about 100 years. This is a number of decades ago. My grandfather, who lived in Lancaster at the time, was an anthropologist. He went out on a little boat and picked up Indian artifacts just from all the little island boats out there. Yeah, it was great. So I inherited a bubble.
Welcome to my show. I'm Barrie-Louise Switzen. The Women's Connection is a program about women connecting with women. Our guest today is a woman that I hope you will never need. But just in case you do need a lawyer, let me introduce Joyce B. David. Joyce, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about what kind of law you practice.
Well, I practice criminal law.
Very interesting.
Yes, different. There are not too many women in my profession who are in private practice. So that's sort of an unusual thing to do. In terms of my background, I don't know how far you want to go back.
Whatever you would like to share with the audience.
Well, let's see. I think on my first grade report card, the teacher wrote a remark on the back, "Joyce never shuts up. Joyce always wants to be the center of attention." So I found the perfect job for myself.
Being a criminal attorney.
I get paid to dance around the courtroom and be the center of attention, and I like it.
How did you ever become a criminal lawyer?
I think I grew up watching Perry Mason, and I thought he looked a little like my dad, and I just thought that was a lot of fun. And I grew up very sheltered, so this was a way to sort of walk through another world, and then I could come back to my own world, which is a little safer. I had come from a long line of rabbis, so this is about as far as you could get from that.
Well, as I understand, rabbis are basically the lawyers in Judaism type thing?
Well, some of them are.
Right.
I think I minister to my clients partly. You know, I couldn't be a rabbi in my family because they're Orthodox, and they don't like women rabbis. But I feel good if a client says to me that they feel better after having spoken to me. That makes me feel good too.
That's a compliment.
Mm-hmm. I feel that's part of my dad, you know. So, as a matter of fact, my dad and I talk about the fact that, you know, if I ever want to become a judge, he wears the same sort of robes.
I never thought about that.
Yes, and he would like me to wear his robes. I think that would be nice. It'd
That'd
be like
be lovely.
Dad hugging me, you know, while I'm trying to make decisions.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what did your parents think of you when you decided you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, my parents were wonderful, very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when I started college, I was a physics and math major.
This is quite a switch.
Yes, well, there were roaches in the physics lab. It was really gross, and I decided... And I wanted to be an astronaut first, but I learned that you had to train in a centrifuge that goes round and round.
Right.
And I used to get dizzy in the playground on that thing that goes round and round. So then I switched to journalism and film.
That's
at
quite a
NYU.
combination.
Oh, it was wonderful. I spent one term watching Gerald McBoing Boing cartoons and Akira Kurosawa movies. So originally I wanted to be a journalist. And I did some work. I did some writing. But I was young and I didn't really know anything to write about. And criminal law is, in a way, to have a wealth of information. Eventually, if I have time ever to write my memoirs, at least now I have something to write about.
Well, what kind of interesting cases have you had?
Well, I've been very lucky. I've had a lot of interesting cases. I represented a hitman who killed 6 people.
Did you feel threatened at that point?
That's the only time in my entire career that I felt a little threatened. Because the press broke a story. They'd gotten word that this gang was going to hijack a helicopter and break these guys out of jail.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, and I was the only woman on the defense team. So I was a little worried that I would be the vulnerable one.
So what did you do about this?
I worried. I called a friend of mine who happens to be a judo expert and basically asked her to teach me on the phone. You know,
on the phone.
Right, tell me what to do on the phone. And she gave me some very good advice. She said, whatever I do, I should do it very hard and very fast, you know, while my adrenaline is pumping.
Right.
So I actually got along really well with my client. If it weren't for the fact that he was a hitman, you know, it would have been all right.
So you never really had to use all this information you got?
No, thank goodness. I couldn't see myself really doing it. I defended the man who stabbed the Reverend Al Sharpton in the chest. That was interesting.
What was that like? What was Sharpton like?
Well, interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And I did a lot of research on him. So I like to give credit where credit is due. He's very well read. What I enjoyed the most was being able to cross-examine him. Because if I were in his sort of milieu, I never could talk over him. That's not the way I do things. But on the witness stand, he had to shut up and answer my questions. And it was a wonderful feeling of control. I really liked it a lot. So last year I went up to the prison where my client is incarcerated with Sharpton and Jack Newfield from the Post, because Sharpton wanted to sit down with my client and talk to him, sort of mediate what had gone on.
For what reason?
Well, he said it was partly because he was writing his autobiography, and he wanted to include that. He wanted closure. And apparently the stabbing changed his life quite a bit.
In what way?
Well, he reevaluated the path he was taking. And, well, he certainly was less likely to go marching through Bensonhurst. But it was a very interesting time. You know, we went up to the prison, and, you know, he's something of a celebrity, so we got good treatment. And then afterwards we went to have a bite to eat, all of us, and Jack Newfield and Sharpton were dropping names, and I was sitting there being very impressed. And some local press photographer must have been tipped off and came to find out why he was there. And he didn't want to tell them because he'd given Newfield an exclusive. So they asked who I was, and he said I was his attorney, which I liked. I was hoping that would get...
Nice.
Yeah. And then he thought about it, and his other attorneys have both been disbarred. And so he commented that I'm the only attorney he has who's still practicing.
So have you represented him at all?
No, not yet. That would be
okay.
sort of interesting, though.
Now, you've had some other high-profile clients, too. You had some woman stalking a doctor?
Yes, I did. One of my most interesting cases, my client suffered from a mental illness known as erotomania. And
Which
now,
is?
well, I'll explain what that is. If you recall, there's a woman who keeps moving into David Letterman's house and claims to be his wife.
Right.
She suffers from erotomania. It's where you believe you're having a relationship with someone. And my client had stalked the chief surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital for 9 years. He would get on a plane to speak at a conference on his way to Madrid or wherever, and she'd be in the seat next to him on the plane.
That's quite a feat.
Yeah, she was very brilliant and very crazy. One of the problems with representing her, among other things, is that I couldn't even discuss with her using any sort of psychiatric defense. Because erotomania is a delusion. And a delusion means that she really believes she's having a relationship with the doctor. I couldn't tell her that it was all in her mind. She wouldn't go with that. So to her, this trial was about reestablishing their relationship.
The relationship?
That she believed she had with this doctor. She wanted me to wear Narelle perfume because she said when they were together she wore Narelle and it would trigger, you know, the memory. A scent is supposed to be a good memory trigger. She wanted me to ask the judge to wear Narelle perfume.
Was it a man judge or a woman?
Well, this woman, in addition to stalking the chief surgeon of Memorial Sloan Kettering, had stalked a Supreme Court judge in Manhattan. She stalked Jack Littman, who's a well-known criminal defense attorney. She stalked an assistant DA in Manhattan. And so all the men were very wary of her. So the whole cast of characters in the courtroom were women.
That must have been quite a...
It was very interesting. Vanity Fair wrote an article about the case. But it was interesting.
And you got your name in print?
Yeah, which is always fun.
Now, let me ask you something. How do they pay you? I mean, how do your clients pay you? Or?
Well, I try to get paid up front, you know, as much as possible. If the case is very interesting, then that's sort of a trade-off. I mean, I need to support myself and my children. I was a single mother for a long time. But, you know, the fact that it's an interesting case helps. You know, lawyers are supposed to do some pro bono work.
Right.
And, you know, my standard joke is that I do a lot of it, but not intentionally. I just happen to get stiffed.
Well, that's not good.
No, I agree. It's really not good. And one of the things about being a woman is somehow they expect that you'll charge them less.
Well, that's not right.
No, not at all. I'll get calls sometimes from clients, potential clients, who've had a male attorney representing them, taken all their money, and now they want me to take over the case, and they have no money left. You know, and
So what do you do in a case like that?
I tell them I'm sorry. You know, they can have someone appointed to them, but I too get paid for my work.
Have you had any lawyers that you've represented.
Yes, I have, a couple of them. One of them, his case also got some coverage. He disappeared a couple of years ago. I think it might have been 1990, around Christmas, New Year's time. He disappeared, and while he was gone, it was discovered that his clients were out about $15 million.
15.
Mm-hmm. So he returned, and he came right into the Manhattan DA's office with this 19-page letter explaining that he'd been kidnapped by agents of a giant corporation. And actually it turned out that he was referring to General Motors. Because in addition to being an attorney, he'd been an engineer, and he developed a car that ran on electricity. And he claimed that they were trying to steal his designs or run him out of business. And he was very interesting. And the court was very cute about it. Since he was accused of stealing $15 million, they set his bail at $15 million.
Keep it at round numbers.
Yeah, so I found his case very interesting. He and his wife.
You?
Yes, well, this is also interesting. You know up front that you might not get a certain amount of money. So you try to at least get enough to cover your time. But he actually owes me $42,000, which I may hope to collect in 7 to 21 years.
When he gets out?
Right. So that's like the most money anybody has ever owed me. So I think that's, but I did get some money from him.
Well, that's not too swift.
No, but it was an interesting case to be involved with. And then I had a client who was a lawyer who was a workers' compensation lawyer, and he was accused of basically fondling one of his women clients. He claimed that he was helping prepare her for the physical examination that you have in a workers' compensation case.
Oh, that's a new approach.
Yeah, fortunately we got an acquittal for him. I was worried he'd have a heart attack. He was so nervous about all the proceedings.
Well, that's okay with me. I have no problems with that. Now, going back a minute, you were in journalism and then you switched to law. Mm-hmm. And is that what helped you write your book, or?
Well, actually, I tend to do things either out of anger or adversity. The reason I wrote this book, and I'm very proud of it, I originally wrote it in 1986. This is the 4th printing, and it's about to go into a 5th printing. But I had a client who, I'm used to explaining this stuff, and it's coming out of my ears. It gets boring for me to explain the whole system. And he brought his mother, and then the next time he came with his father. And he came to my office about 4 times with various family members, and I explained this stuff ad nauseum. And they wound up hiring someone else. And I was saying, gee, if I'd just written this down, I wouldn't have wasted all that time explaining it. And I did. I wrote it down, and I sent the book to various judges for their critique, one of whom was at that time the presiding judge of the appellate courts. And I tend to have friends who are naysayers. I don't know, maybe they think they're protecting me. They said, oh, don't send it to him, he won't call you. But he did. He had me come over to his chambers, and he loved the book.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I asked if he would write a foreword to the book. And again, my friend said, don't ask him. He wrote a lovely, lovely foreword.
Well, I'm glad you pursue things.
Yes, absolutely. And then I was lucky because after he retired as the presiding judge of the appellate division, he was appointed to head the Mullen Commission in New York. And that's a commission named after him. His name is Milton Mullen. So it was a good bit of luck for me.
Maybe you should run for judgeship in Brooklyn?
Well, I thought about that, but I really like being my own boss. And you can't be a judge and be your own boss. At some point, I probably will, as a retirement sort of a job. So I think I'd be a good judge, but right now I like my independence.
Now, you've also been on Court TV?
Yes, yeah, I was one of the guest commentators.
And what's that like, being on?
Well, it's fun. I mean, I like being on television. It's fun. I mean, if I like being the center of attention in the courtroom, then obviously the bigger the audience, the more fun it is for me. The thing I didn't like that much about Court TV is that I would be on for about 4 hours, but I would only get to talk for about 3 minutes. Most of the time we'd be watching tape, and a lot of times I'd be joking with the anchor off the air while we were supposed to be watching tape, and then it would be time for us to talk, and we wouldn't have any clue what had just gone on. So that was
moments to remember? Yeah,
because I tend to make wisecracks a lot, and I used to get in trouble for that in school, and now I just use it in the courtroom a lot.
To your advantage, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I feel comfortable in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. I sometimes tell people I turn into Mick Jagger in the courtroom. I strut. It's my courtroom. I own it.
You're performing. You've got a responsibility to your clients.
Yeah, and I like to have a good time too.
Let me ask you about citizen's arrest. Under what circumstances can a citizen like myself arrest somebody?
Well, if you see someone committing a felony, you can make an arrest. If you see them committing a misdemeanor, you can make an arrest. The problem is that you do it at your own peril, because if you're not right, if it turns out that you're mistaken about what's going on, you could be liable for criminal arrest if you're holding on to someone against his will, for example. If you do make a citizen's arrest, your obligation is to take that person to a police station as quickly as you possibly can. Store security guards will arrest people for shoplifting. They're lay people,
so they
like
come
you
under
and me, absolutely. The guardian angels fit into that category. I was in a documentary about them, and this is what I explained, what they can and cannot do.
Now, so if the guardian angel decides to arrest an individual on the street, they are liable because they're not...
If they're wrong.
If they're
wrong about it, they could be sued by that person. They could be arrested themselves if they're wrong. So I wouldn't suggest you go out and, try to make arrests unless you're really sure.
Or hail a cab, not a cab, a policeman that's coming down the street.
Or a cab.
Or a cab, right. Are your children following in your footsteps?
No, not actually. I have 2 children. As I mentioned before, I raised them. I was a single parent from the time they were 6 and 7 years old. Now they're 24 and 25 years old. My daughter, who just got married and moved to Atlanta.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm a mother-in-law. Oh, well. She worked in the prosecutor's office in Brooklyn for a number of years in an outreach program that the Brooklyn DA has, where they go into the schools and they adopt a 5th grade class. And when she started there, people met her and they would say, "Oh, you're Joyce David's daughter. Isn't that lovely?" And then as she was there a while and newer DAs came into the office who didn't really know me, when they would meet me, they would say, "Oh, you're Laura David's mother."
What a switch.
Yeah. My son, neither of my children really, want to, which is fine by me. I want them to do their own thing. When I used to come home and announce that I was on trial, they would go running to their rooms because I would turn into this crazy person. So I think it might have put them off. So my son's an accountant who just sort of switched into computers, and he's in competition with me about who can make the most money, which I think is great. And he's doing very well. I'm really proud of him.
Oh, that's marvelous.
Yes, it is. It's very nice.
Let me ask you about the Miranda case.
Okay.
What exactly is the Miranda? It's the Miranda law with reading your rights. And it came into fruition because somebody was arrested against their will, or they wouldn't read their rights, or please explain it.
Yeah, it has to do with when a confession is admissible into evidence. And obviously, if the police beat you, and they get a confession, then that's not a voluntary confession. But there was a case many years ago, and this fellow named Ernesto Miranda, if I remember correctly, it had to do with a barroom brawl, or perhaps he died in a barroom brawl. I don't remember exactly. But the Supreme Court of the United States decided that the police should actually read to each person being arrested their rights to remain silent. Unfortunately, it's been taken really, to its absurdity sometimes. Do you remember the case of Joel Steinberg, a lawyer accused of killing his daughter?
That's in the Village here in New York?
In New York.
Yes.
Well, he was an attorney, and he raised the issue that his rights were not read to him. And, that really is absurd. I mean, he was a criminal attorney. He knew his rights. So to raise that as an issue that they weren't read to him, I think is taking the law to its absurdity.
What happened in that case? Did they throw out...
The judge thought so, too. But I'll have clients tell me often that they weren't read their rights, and somehow that means that their case should be thrown out. But really, I usually say to them after they tell me that, "Well, did you make a confession?" And they'll say, "No." Well, I said, "Well, no harm, no foul, because it's your right to remain silent. So if you have remained silent already, then it's not like your case is going to be thrown out because of it."
Okay, and that you explain in your book.
A little bit. Well, the main thing I explain in my book is keep your mouth shut and call me to represent you. It's amazing how many people talk to the police and give them, give up their rights, and they somehow feel that, cops often will trick people into confessions.
Like?
Well, they'll say it'll go easier on you, or we'll let you go, and they're just lying through their teeth. Unfortunately, they're allowed to do that. That's considered good police work, and the confession will stand. And then, of course, they can always come into court, meaning the police, and lie at the hearing and say they did read the rights, and the judge will believe them.
So
I had a client once who I surrendered to a police precinct. And when a lawyer is involved at that early stage, I can tell the police I don't want him questioned. And that's it. They can't question him at all. The next day when he was brought to court, he was quite bruised. And later, the police claimed that he made a spontaneous statement without being questioned. They claimed that he banged his face against his cell wall and punched himself in the face. I mean, really.
So what do you do in a case like that?
Well, I was very surprised that the judge bought it. I was really surprised and disappointed because it was a judge I used to respect. I tell my clients if they call me early enough, if they know the police are looking for them,
right,
just keep your mouth shut. I even put something called an assert your rights card on the inside back cover of the book.
I love that.
Yeah. I was considering putting a dotted line that they should ask the police to sign indicating they've read it, but I don't think that would be a good idea. Now, if you cut that card out on the dotted line, on the back of it will appear my business card. I put that on the back.
Very clever.
Well, this is a business as well.
I think that's, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Very good.
I got a call a couple of years ago from a DA in the Bronx who wanted to, each time I republish the book, I do a different color cover. So I'll know if someone calls me and they've read the book, I'll ask them what color the cover is. I'll know which edition they've read. This DA called me wanting to know what year this particular, the blue one, was published, because the defendant in a case had claimed that he'd showed this card to the cops and that his statement should not have been admissible because of it. So I felt really good. That was fun.
That was a nice way of paying you a compliment.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And saying your work is doing good and it's getting around. Mm-hmm. Now, if somebody wanted the book, how could they get hold of it?
Well, the funny thing is that up until now, I haven't really sold the book. If a client calls me, I mail copies out. If I do public speaking, I give them away. Every time we republish, I donate 400 copies to the Department of Corrections libraries, because that's a way to generate work for myself. The book, I'm very proud of it. It's a good book, and the back cover is blatant, public relations for me, and it generates work for me. My book was plagiarized twice. I found out someone had changed some of it, but certainly not enough. It was a street person, who I knew.
It's always somebody you know.
Well, I knew him because he'd asked me to donate copies for a fundraiser, which I did. And then the next time he wanted a lot of copies, I asked him to basically cover the printing costs. And I guess he decided he'll just print them up himself. He changed some of the information, and I found out that he was selling them for $6 a copy.
Well, that's a nice profit.
Right. Well, I've decided I'm tired of working so hard, and the next printing that we're doing, we're going to start selling them. We're having someone approach me about doing that. I'm a real control freak. I own the publishing company that publishes the book. I even did the cover design, and I can't really draw, but I don't like anyone touching my projects.
Well, I don't blame you. So if somebody wants to get hold of the
Well, they
copy,
can call me and I'll mail it to them.
Okay, how do they get hold of you?
Well, they can call me at area code 718-875-2000, which used to be A&S's phone number.
Oh, that must be fun.
I still get wrong numbers for them, calls for A&S. Now Macy's in Brooklyn adopted because they just changed their number by one digit, and I get a lot of calls.
Well, I keep meeting very interesting people by my dialing the wrong phone number. Mm-hmm. So, I can relate to that. Who knows it? They might need you as an attorney one day.
I hope so.
There's also the First Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and the Sixth Amendment.
There are a whole lot of them, aren't there?
There certainly are, but I think that they pertain mostly to our rights as citizens in case we're ever involved in a criminal act or a potential criminal act. So
well, I'm also partial to the Fourth Amendment, which is basically has to do with searches and seizures, being protected in your home from having the cops just, tear down the door and come in and search. The Fifth Amendment has to do with your rights to remain silent, has to do with statements. You can't be forced to incriminate yourself. The Sixth Amendment has to do with your right to counsel, and that has been extended to your right to a fair trial. Now, the way the First Amendment sometimes comes into play, and since I have a background in journalism, It has to do
Right.
with free press. And there often is some friction between the First and the Sixth Amendment. In cases I've had where the press wants to come in, sometimes I don't want the press there because it will create a situation that's harmful for a client of mine. You know, witnesses are less likely to want to come forward, and so then it's free press versus fair trial.
So who would?
It's up to the judge.
What does the judge usually say?
Well, it depends if the judge wants to be on TV or not.
Ah.
So, you know, I can't say what anyone usually does because they each do their own thing.
Well, let's say if somebody finds himself in a very strenuous situation or a difficult situation, the first thing is they have the option to remain silent.
Mm-hmm.
Even though they've been read their rights, they can remain silent because that doesn't guarantee anything. And then they call you.
Well, it's going to be hard for them to call me from the precinct, you know, unless they know me already. You know, it's gotten to the point, because I've been doing this for almost 20 years, where I've represented various family members, fathers and sons, brothers and mothers. One of my most, you know, so as the family grows, it's almost like Rumpole of the Bailey has, if you ever watched that.
No,
it's about an English barrister, and I never understand their system, but he has a particular family where they always get arrested, and so that happens to me also.
Keep it in the family, so to
right.
speak.
But otherwise, usually they don't get to, sometimes the family will call a lawyer, but they themselves usually can't call from the precinct.
Oh, you can't?
I mean, that's another thing. People are under this idea that they are entitled to a free phone call at the precinct. That's in the movies, you know. You're entitled to a free phone call after you've seen a judge and after bail is set. Then you're entitled to make a call to see if someone can bail you out. I mean, the police will often let you make a call, but you're not entitled to that.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Well, I'm glad we clarified that for our audience. I mean, I just
Not in
hope
New
nobody
York.
ever has to do it, but at the same time, it's good to know. Now, I was under the impression that you can make a free phone call.
People are under a lot of impressions. They're under the impressions that the system is fair. You know, I'll get questions like, can the police do that? Do they have the right to do that? You know, whatever it is the police have done.
Right.
And I usually tell, you know, the caller, I say that they might not have the right, but they have the power.
Big difference.
Yeah, but it's still, the results are sort of the same. And if the cops come to your door and they knock on the door and they want to come in, it's very hard to resist. Most people are not going to resist. Or if the police barge in when they're not supposed to.
What do you do in a case like that?
Well, I mean, I recently had a call from someone who he called me because his father had been arrested, and it's someone I had represented before. I represented the father and the son, so that's why he called me. And the police came in, they searched the house. And
With or without
without
a
a warrant. So I called, you know, and I spoke to the police officer, and he said, oh, your client consented. Now, my client's not an idiot. He's not going to have drugs in plain view and consent to a search of his house. I mean, obviously that's not true. And the son told me the house was torn apart. I told him to take pictures. And later on, at some point, there'll be a hearing to see whether or not, you know, my client actually consented. And these pictures will be helpful. Because, of course, if my client gets on the witness stand and said he didn't consent and the police say he did, the judge is going to believe the cops.
But the pictures will help him.
Yes, you know, unless the kid messed up the house himself. It's not a bad idea.
So in other words, everybody should have a camera ready and able to take pictures. God forbid anything should happen. I mean, it's also a safety precaution if you have a disaster in your house, too, where you can take a picture of your possessions.
Mm-hmm. Or if you look particularly nice, you want a picture
Oh,
of how
that's
you
right.
look.
Well, Joyce, I thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope nobody ever has to call her, but if you do, your phone number again is?
718-875-2000.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us today. I'd like to hear from you. Please write me, Barrie Switzen, The Woman's Connection, Ansonia Station, Post Office Box 918, New York, New York, 10023.